Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Membet. We are going to get started from the very top. I'll just remind us what we were talking about. We're still in the laws of chazakah, living in a land for 3 years, claiming ownership. We said that even if it's 3 different people, one bought from the other, and each year was a different one living there, you can still create a chazakah. The last one can claim the land is mine, because we assume that the owner didn't think it was just 3 random people, but heard about the fact that there was a sale. Because sales, the word gets around. And in fact, Rav said, if it's written in a document, word gets around, not necessarily in a shtar. But then we said, wait, but didn't Rav say, that contradicts. Rav said somewhere else that if you buy land from someone and didn't check out that the property was liened, and it turns out it was liened, and that they had sold land to someone but with a guarantee, you should have figured that out as the buyer, and you should have looked into it. So doesn't that sound like you should have known someone who had bought the land, because word gets around even if it was done with witnesses? But the Gemara separated those cases and said, no, that's because the buyer should have checked. In other words, it's his responsibility or her responsibility to do proper homework, make sure that the property is not liened, and therefore, once it was done with witnesses, at least there should be a way of finding that out. But basically, we have this concept that Rav said that if you buy land or sell land, I should say, with witnesses, with a guarantee, even though there wasn't a document, you can collect, the person who bought that land can go collect from any lien property you have after that date. But that seems to contradict something Rav said, and something that's a basic known distinction when it comes to the laws of loans. The difference between an oral loan, one done in front of witnesses, and a loan done with a document is exactly the issue of nechasim mishuabadim. So, and we're going to see that right now. So why in a sale, if you bought land with a guarantee in front of witnesses only without a document, how is it that you could go collect on that land? Let's say that land gets collected from you, taken because the person who you bought it from didn't pay a loan back. They seize the property from you. You go back to the owner and say, I want my money back. And they don't have the money to pay. You can go take it from lien property, even though the sale was only done with witnesses, your original sale. When it comes to a loan, utnan, hamavet chavero b'shtar goveh min nechasim mishuabadim. Al yidei edim goveh min nechasim nechorin. But if the same thing is not that it was land with a guarantee and all that, and it was taken away, but if I borrowed money from you and didn't pay, and you go to collect it back from me and I don't have money to pay, well, if it was written in a document, the loan, then you can collect from any lien property I have. But if it was just with witnesses, you can't. You can only collect from free property I haven't sold off. If I sold property to other people, you can't collect from there. Why? Because the assumption is when they bought my property, they had no way of finding out that I had a loan out in my name. And now we're going to have to figure out, according to what we said before, well, they should have gone and figured out that I had a sale, that I had sold someone property with a guarantee. So why that can they find out even if I didn't have a document, but a loan not? Seems like this is a total contradiction in Rav. Now, Rav didn't say this, but a Mishnah said this. Now, you might say generally, Amoraim, people in the Gemara can't argue against Tanaim. So if it's a Mishnah, it must be Rav agrees. But if you want to say Rav Tanahu Pali, well, Rav has different status on everyone. He was one of the first Amoraim, and he had great status. He was a person of great stature. And because of that, he is accorded the status that if he wants to, he can disagree with the Mishnah. So maybe he just disagrees with this Mishnah and says loan like a sale, same thing. And even if it was done with witnesses, you can collect from lien property. But you can't say that because V'harav Shmuel, the Amrei Travayu, both Rav and Shmuel said, Milva al pe'e no govel lomena yorshim v'lomena lekuchot. If you had an oral loan and then the person died, you can't take it from their heirs. Okay, why not? This isn't our topic, but the reason is it's the same kind of idea. Is that, well, it's not actually the same idea. It's that in the case where you have a document, if the father paid the money back, so the creditor shouldn't have the document anymore, the father should have made sure it was ripped up. And therefore, you can collect if you have a document, because the assumption is if it was really paid back already, right? We don't know if the father paid the money back. We didn't ask him before he died. So all we have is the facts on the ground. If you still have the document, the creditor, then obviously you can collect it, because if it was paid back, you should have ripped it up. But if it's a milva al pen, oral, so it might be very nice if these witnesses come and said, your father borrowed money from me, but there's no way to know. Maybe my father paid it back. The witnesses don't know that. They were witnesses to the original loan. They didn't follow what happened every day after that. So you can't collect from heirs. And get this, lo min alekuchot. Rav himself said you can't collect a loan from anyone who bought land from you. Okay, bought land from the borrower. So lien property doesn't work. You can't collect from lien property because it was oral. It was not done. It was done in front of witnesses. This contradicts. So clear contradiction, to which the Gemara says, no contradiction at all, because milva azvini karamit. What you're taking a case of a loan and comparing it to a sale. They're totally different. Why? Milva, and particularly in this issue of word getting out. Milva ki kayazif, bitsina kayazif. When you loan money, why do we think that word won't get out? And that way, when you bought my property, you had no idea I had a loan out because I just did it in front of witnesses. Why? Because when I did it in front of witnesses, I want to keep it quiet. I don't want people to know. Why? It's bad for me that people know I borrowed money. People will make my property cheap. They'll cheapen my property. What does that mean? It means that they'll know I'm desperate for money. And therefore, when you go to buy a house, let's say from me, or a field, you'll know that I'm willing to take less. So you'll bargain me down because you'll know that I'm desperate for money. So I don't want anyone to know I'm desperate for money. It's bad for my future sales. And zvine, but in a sale, when I go to sell land, I want to make it as public as possible, right? We put ads out everywhere, big ads on the street, house for sale, because I want to get the best price. I want the maximum number of people to see it so I can get the best buyer. And therefore, I want it to be known. So a sale is known even if there's no document, whereas a loan is really not. And that's how we explain the contradiction in Rav. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have a Braita with a similar case to the Shlosha Lekuchot, the three buyers. This can be a little bit different. Achla Av Shana, the Shtayim. The father ate for the first year, and then the father died and passed the land on inheritance to the son. Son ate for 2 years. And now the person didn't protest, but they should have protested, the owner, because even though it's two different people, it's pretty obvious that the son and the father are all one person coming from one ownership. Ha'av shtayim ba'ben shana. It doesn't matter which one was 1 year, which one was 2 years, all the same. Okay, father was there for 2 years. The father was there for 2 years, and the son for a year also. Ha'av shana ba'ben shana v'alukech shana. If you have father first year, died, passed it on to son for second year, third year, the son sold it to somebody else, and each year somebody else was living there. Still, they can create a chazaka. The owner should have protested, right? Harezo chazakan. Now, why should the owner have protested? Because the owner should have known, like we said before, that the buyer bought the land, so they know it's all from one major part, right? One owner, so to speak, originated with one owner, who, again, the owner of the land should claim, right, that he wasn't the owner to begin with. So there should have been a protest lodged in the first 3 years. If not, they can claim ownership, meaning the third person, now the buyer, will claim ownership. Or if it was father and son, the son will claim ownership. So now, what is this? Are you saying that anytime someone buys, there's a call that gets around, which is exactly what we've been saying until now? Well, Uriminhi, this is going to contradict the following source, which perhaps is a continuation of that other source. Achla b'fnei ha'av shana. Now we're going to flip who's who. It's not that who's living in the land now and claiming chazaka has changed hands, but the original owner has changed hands. So we're going to have one person living in the land for 3 years, but the person who's going to now complain and say, hey, this was mine, and before me, it was this person, before me, it was that person's, is going to be the one that keeps changing. So let's see. Achla b'fnei ha'av shana. So first, it was owned by this man. He's the father, and someone else starts living there. And the first year, the father has to protest. He doesn't protest. Ubefnei ben shtayim. And then the father dies, it goes to the son, and the son doesn't protest. And we're going to see, that's also a chazaka, because it was owned by the same person the whole time, and they didn't complain or protest. So the fact they didn't protest, that's considered one complete unit. Again, b'fnei av shtayim, b'fnei ben shana, this is like a flip case of the other. The father and the son, father for 2 years, son for 1 year. Okay, it's a flip of the previous, and it's also a flip of, right, it's a variation on the previous Braita that we saw. Bifnei av shana, bifnei ben shana, bifnei lokech shana. If it was first the father for a year, then the son for a year, and then a buyer for the year, meaning the father died, passed it on to the son, and the son sold it. Now, let's go with this. If when you sell it, then there's a koll, word gets out, then theoretically, what should that be? When the original owner sold it to someone and it was public, that is a macha'ah. What more macha'ah do you want then, and we'll see this in the Gemara in a minute, than saying, I'm selling this land. That means I am the owner. So that's a protest. But what does it say here? Even though you would think that was a protest, because if you just said a minute ago that a lokech has a koll, everyone knows about it, then hare, it shouldn't be a chazakah. But what does it say here? Hare zo chazakah. So isa kadatach lokechi lekala. If you think a lokech has a koll, everyone will know when they buy it. Ein lecha macha'ah gdola mizo. What more could you want a macha'ah than actually saying I'm the owner of this land because I'm selling it to somebody else? So obviously that's a protest, and the fact that this isn't shows maybe lokech doesn't have a koll, and that's why it's not considered a protest that the son sold the land to somebody else. Well, Rav Papa answers the question by saying, I'm a Rav Papa. This is what we call again in ukimta, assuming this is in a particular unique case. You could say that this Braita was talking about if you sold your fields, but you didn't say which field. You just said, I'm selling you one of my fields, and you didn't specify which field, and that's why it's not a protest, because you didn't specify with the witnesses, let's say, okay, it was in front of witnesses, you didn't specify. You showed the guy which field, but in front of the witnesses, you didn't specify which field, and therefore word didn't get around, and therefore there was no protest against this particular individual that happened to be living in one of your fields. New Mishnah. Ha'umnim v'ashutfim. We're now going to have all sorts of exceptions to the rule where someone could be eating the produce for 3 years and yet they do not have a chazakah on the land. Ha'umnim v'ashutfim v'arisim v'apitropin ein lahem chazakah. So someone who you give your objects to, now all of a sudden we're leaving the world of land and we're moving to metaltal and movables. So Rashbam points this out and says that when it comes to movables, if you have like your car, and let's say someone's driving your car and you see them driving it, you don't protest, that means it's theirs, okay? So movables would be even more immediate. But not if it's an uman, if you brought your car to the shop to get fixed, okay, and then they're driving your car around and you didn't protest, that might be a bad example because they shouldn't be walking around in your car. But still, the point is they can't create a chazakah by saying, oh, look, this is in my possession. I guess it's not that they're driving around your car, but they say, oh, look, the car's in my shop. That means it's mine. Obviously, you can't claim the car is yours if it's in your shop. Hashutfin, if you're partners, okay, here we're going to talk about this a lot because it's a little bit tricky and not everybody agrees with this halacha, but if we're partners, so I often are in your part of the land also, we share the land. So the fact that I'm using it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean that you didn't protest because you thought, right, because you agreed with me that it was mine. No, you didn't protest because I'm working on your half and you sometimes do stuff on my half. Ha'arisim, v'apitropim. Okay, so an aris, a sharecropper, obviously the sharecropper eats produce. That's part of the deal. Doesn't mean sharecropper is an owner. Apitropim, someone who manages someone else's property, obviously also to be eating the produce. Ein lahem chazakah. So there's no laws of chazakah. And furthermore, lo li'ish chazakah b'nechsei ishto, v'lo li'isha chazakah b'nechsei ba'ala. Husband and wife often share their property, but again, there's property she brings it, there's property that's his, but either which way, they could be eating produce from each other's fields, or father and son also, they share often, they eat in each other's fields, it's not an indication of anything, even if it's 3 years, right? Doesn't matter. This is a kind of funny Bamed Dvarim Orim, because this is saying all the laws of chazakah that we've been learning this entire chapter is all about a machzik. We're talking about someone who's living in someone else's land or living in land that is now, there's a debate about, okay, there's an issue, so a disputed claim. Someone says, what are you doing in my land? That's what we're talking about. That's what needing chazkat shalosh shanim and all these rules. And that's that kind of chazakah. But there's another type of chazakah, and this is, how do you acquire something? One of the ways you acquire land is with chazakah. What does that mean? That's not 3 years. That is, aval b'notei matana, if you give me a gift, meaning you agree that you're giving it to me. Achim shachalku, we have brothers that are dividing property of their fathers, they inherited. Hamachzik b'nechsei ger, we have someone who's takes the property of a convert who dies anything that when a convert dies, all their land becomes, or all their objects become hefker. They don't have heirs. There's a ger that has no heirs that were born after the conversion. In those cases, na'al v'gadar uparatz kol shehu hareso chazaka. How do you create a chazaka? It's not like a chazaka 3 years. That's something totally different. This is, at what point do I show I'm the owner of this property? You gave me a gift, but until I do a chazaka or some sort of kinyan, there's other types of kinyanim you could do, but the way you do a kinyan chazaka is by locking the gate, by putting up a gate, by opening up a gate there, doing something that is an indication of ownership. That's a different kind of chazaka. And our Mishnah is kind of saying, don't confuse these two terms, really. It sounds like that's what they're saying. Moving now to Amud Bet. Avoid Shmuel v'Levi Tanu. We're now going to have two different versions of the Mishnah. The father of Shmuel and Levi, their version was, Shutaf ein lo chazaka. But it didn't say anything about an uman. But if a shutaf doesn't have a chazaka on the land, for sure, kol shekain uman. Obviously, an uman wouldn't have, because who's more likely to have bought the other, right? If we're partners in land, often one partner will sell out to the other. So it's very likely that if I didn't complain for 3 years and you've been eating the produce, we can assume you have a chazakah. And yet the Mishnah says you don't. So if in that case you don't, for sure, the guy who runs the car garage, of course, doesn't have chazakah on my car, because it's very unlikely that I'm going to sell it to the guy in the garage. Or if I bring my clothes to the dry cleaners, it's very unlikely that I sold it to them. Right? It's not the most common thing. Maybe a car in a garage you would, maybe if you're trying to get rid of it, but certainly not a dry cleaner, and usually not the car sales, the car repairman either, or repairwoman. Shmuel Tane, so Shmuel taught, Uman ein lo chazaka. His version of Mishnah read, in Uman doesn't have a chazaka. But he didn't have anything about a shutaf. Now, if the Mishnah says the Uman doesn't have a chazaka and didn't say anything about a shutaf, you would assume that Shmuel holds about shutaf yesh lo chazaka. So Shmuel must hold that you can create a chazaka even if you're a partner. Okay, you can, because again, if you're the partner and you've been eating there for 3 years and I didn't say anything to you and you've been eating all the produce in the land, what? You think that I really live there? Why would I let you eat for 3 years without complaining? So you really can create a chazakah. And in fact, as the Shmuel Atame, Shmuel is consistent within his approach. Tamar Shmuel, hashutafim machzikim zalzeh, said 3 things about shutafim, 3 laws about them. They can create a chazakah one on the other, which matches exactly the way we just read Shmuel. Me'idin zalzeh, they can testify about the other's part of the property. They're not considered nogeh b'davar, as we say, like of the same party, no, because they each own half. So one can testify about the other half of the other owners. We're going to get to that tomorrow. It's going to be the first thing on tomorrow's daf. Why are they believed? Why are they not considered nogeh b'davar? And na'asim shomrei sachar zelazeh. If they watch something one for the other, if one watches part of the other's property or something, or objects that they share, but the other sides, and then it gets stolen, they have to pay, even if they're like a shomer sachar, even if they're not getting paid. Why is that? You might remember we had a Mishnah in Bava that said, if I watch your item and I say, I'll watch your item and you watch mine, it's as if we're getting paid, and we're therefore considered shomer sachar, because I'm getting benefit from now I'm watching yours because you're watching mine. It's exactly what partners are. I might watch part of it where you're going to watch a different part, and therefore it's like I'm getting paid because I'm getting benefit from watching your item. So that's why partners are considered shomer sachar. Now we're just going to go back to the first halacha, which was our halacha, which is shutafim machzikim zalzeh. They can create a chazaka one on the other. Rami le Rabbi Abba le Rabbi Yehuda b'ma'arata debei Rabbi Zakkai. So Rabbi Abba brought a question on this to Rabbi Yehuda in the cave of Rav Zakkai. Some people say it's not the cave, it's ma'atzarta, which is the wine press. Either which way, mi amar Shmuel shutaf yesh lo chazaka. Wait a minute, did Shmuel really hold what we just said, that a shutaf has a chazaka? You can create a chazaka on your partner's territory. V'hamar Shmuel shutaf ki yoreh bereshut dameh. A shutaf is like someone who is permitted to come into the land, meaning the shutaf can go into your part, right? And they're allowed to, like a sharecropper, basically. Lav lememra de shutaf ein lo chazaka. Doesn't that mean then shutaf is there like a sharecropper, which means sharecropper can't say, oh, this is mine. Of course not. They work there. So the shutaf, the partner, can't claim that the whole thing is theirs when we're partners in it. It's unlikely I sold it to them. So Shmuel seems to say itself in the opposite. How do we reconcile that? We're going to have three different possibilities. Lo kasha. First answer is hadinachat lekula, hadinachat lepalga. It really depends. Was the partner eating the entire property for 3 years, all the produce, and leaving none for the other partner? Now, in that case, you could say, if they were eating the entire thing and I didn't protest, well, then obviously I agreed that I sold it to them, because why would I let them eat the entire thing for 3 years? But if they were only eating half of the field, let's say they took the better half, they still can't claim that the better half is theirs. Why not? Because, right, they could claim, why'd you let me eat the better half for 3 years without protesting? And I could say, well, that's because we made this arrangement. For 3 years, you were going to eat the better half, and for 3 years after that, I would eat the better half. So I didn't think I needed to complain. Okay, that's the first explanation. So Amrele lahai gisa. Well, some people, we have this answer, a classic lo kasha, this like this like that. But they didn't tell you which one. So in fact, some people interpret it itself in the opposite. So some people interpret it the way I just said, which is if you're eating the whole thing, that actually creates a chazaka. If you're eating part of it and only the good part, you can't create a chazaka on that because likely I didn't protest because probably the arrangement, well, I assumed I would get it for the next 3 years. I didn't think you were going to claim, oh, the better part of the land is mine, and I would have protested had I known that. But some people explain it, Amrele lahai gisa, but some people explain it the other way. Just specifically, if you ate half the field, that's when I should have protested, because why would I let you eat the better part of the land 3 years in a row? I would be worried that you were going to claim the better part of the land is yours, and there I would protest. But if you were eating the entire land for 3 years, then I just assumed, okay, so now it's a little bit trickier here to explain. But if you look in the Rashbam, he says, they say here, because the minhag of shutafim, the Rashbam explained, is le'echol sadeh shalosh shanim. In other words, it's actually less likely that I would let you always eat the better land. That would be unlikely. But to let you eat everything for 3 years, that we could imagine. There might be places where you eat first 3 years, I eat the next 3 years, and that's the way we do it. But I would never let you always take the best land. That would be weird. Why would I do that? If we're partners, we share 50-50. Maybe 1 year you can eat the good land. The next year I eat the good land. It doesn't make sense if we're already splitting it that I would let you split it that way for 3 years in a row. So again, you can explain the logic this way or the opposite. So those are two possible explanations. Here we get a third. Again, we're trying to resolve that Shmuel in one place seems to say shutafim don't create a chazaka, and another place it says shutafim do create a chazaka. Ravina Amar Hava Hadanachet Lekule. You could explain that they actually both took over, in both cases. The partner ate for 3 years all the produce. V'lo kashya hadi badin chaluka hadalei badin chaluka. This reminds us of the beginning of the Masechet. Do you live in a place that's big enough to be split into two? If it's a field that's big enough to be split into two, then there's no way I would have let you eat the whole thing for 3 years unless I sold it to you, because I would want my part of the field, at least to share in half. But if it's such a small field that it's not even worth splitting, and then we don't want two people working the land every year. So it's very likely that I could give you for 3 years. It's not that much land anyway. How much is it producing? I give you for 3 years, and then I'll take it after that for 3 years. And that's why I didn't bother protesting. And therefore, you can't create a chazaka in that case. Now we're just going to finish off with gufa. We're going to go back to the statement we said and ask about the wording. Amar Shmuel, the statement we quoted that contradicted the previous one was shutaf ki yoreh b'reshutami. A shutaf is like someone who goes with permission. My kamashma, what is this teaching us? Well, it sounds like what we said, shutaf ein lo chazaka, right? That you're like someone who goes with permission, and someone who goes with permission can't create a chazaka, because since you can go with permission, that was why nobody protested. If that's the case, lema shutaf ein lo chazaka. Why didn't Shmuel just simply say a shutaf, there's no chazaka? That would have been, right, simpler. So, Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Bava, lomar shenotel b'shevach hamigel l'ktefayim, there's a big mouthful. It's got a lot of things in it, but it's our last line, which is good. We're going to explain it now. You might remember this from a sugya from Bava Metzia. If you go into my field and start planting, and I didn't know, you just start planting in my field, and it's a field where normally I grow crops, and you put trees. Now that blocks my ability to plant crops there because the tree is taking up the space. I can't plant crops. I can claim, what are you doing this? And I have to give you only the minimum amount possible. Like if you increase my field by X, I give you that. If the lower price is how much you spent rather than how much it increased, I give you just what you spent. I just give you your expenses back. But I don't have to give you any of the produce or anything else because you went in without my permission and you did something that theoretically I could complain. I didn't want you to do that. But if you're a shutaf, and this is why you worded it as, it's like someone who goes b'reshut. Now, if you gave me permission to plant your tree, then we share the proceeds because I put in the work like a sharecropper and we share the proceeds. So the shutaf who does anything in the field that's a joint field between them doesn't need to ask permission every time. Even if they don't ask permission, it's like they got permission. And then they can get what we call the shevach hamigel l'ktefayim. That means any produce that's already, you can carry on your shoulder, meaning it's already ready. So I get all the fruits also. I don't just get my expenses or the increase that I enhanced it if that's lower than the expenses, but I can actually get all the produce. And some people say it even means when I went into the field to start working, if there was already produce, I get rights to the field, to my right to half of it anyway, from even from fruits that have already grown. Okay, because and then some people explain here that I really end up with 3/4 because half is my share, and of your half, I'm working like a sharecropper, and that's what it means. I'm like a yorei b'reshut. I'm like a sharecropper, and then I can share the proceeds of the other half of your half as well. Okay, that's it for our daf. We're going to get started with the other statement of Shmuel about the midim zalzeh. When you have two shutafim, they can testify for each other. We're going to explain that at the beginning of tomorrow's daf. So what we did today is we started with this contradiction of Rav between what he says about a malveh with edim, and which is like a milveh al peh, and a sale with edim. And one has, like, the sale has a kol, and the loan doesn't. Why? And therefore the sale could be collected from lien property, but the loan can't. Why is there a difference? And we said because nobody really wants people to know about a loan. They keep that secret as opposed to the sale where we do want people to know about it. Then we moved on to the Mishnah about then we had the case, seeming contradiction with the case of the father-son buyer. And that one seemed to indicate the buyer had a kol, the other seemed to indicate the buyer didn't have a kol because you sold it and we didn't consider that a macha'ah, but we said that was when you weren't specific about your fields. Then we got to this umnim shutvin arisim, all the exceptions to the rule where there is no chazakah, and then we had two versions of the Mishnah. Did it say shutaf, which would then include uman, or did it say uman, which would then not include shutaf? And that was Shmuel who said a shutaf, you actually would have a chazakah, and that fit with something else he said, but contradicted something else he said. And then we had three possible ways to resolve that problem. And then we went to this last statement back to Shmuel where he said, shutaf ki yorei b'reshutami, why was it worded in that way and not just shutaf ein lo chazakah? And they explain what we learned from that anytime a shutaf does work in the land, it's as if they're going with permission, which means they can get part of the proceeds. And they're not, as we see in a different case where someone goes into someone else's field, yado ala tachtona, that they're considered the under, they get the least possible amount. With that, we'll finish today's daf. Wishing everybody a good day.